Thank you for joining us on this journey to discover more about the English Riviera UNESCO Global Geopark, one of Earth's extraordinary places. In this series of interviews, our patron, Professor Iain Stewart, explores what it is that makes this geopark so special, from when the rocks around us were formed, to evidence of early humans, and right up to artists and writers who are being inspired by the geopark today.
So welcome again to the latest in the Geopark in Focus series, where we're celebrating the English Riviera UNESCO Global Geopark and its connection to everything really, to the rocks, to the landscape, to everyday life, and to culture. And in particular in this episode, really we're looking at culture. And we've looked at culture in a number of ways. We've looked at artistic flourishing around it. But actually today's one, we're looking at the writers, the people that have been writing, using the inspiration of the backdrop of the English Riviera, Torbay area, to pursue their craft. And with us, we've got three very able guides, local guides to this kind of topic, Heather, Kevin and Mark. And I'll ask them to introduce themselves really, and to talk each to maybe say a few words about the context in which they're here and what they're interested in. And Heather, it'd be remiss of me not to start with you. So Heather, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection here.
Thank you, Iain. Well, I'm Heather Soderlind, and I retired to Torbay about 7 years ago after trotting around the world and living abroad for a number of years, more than 13 years. And I currently chair the Literature Works, which is the literature development agency for the whole of the Southwest region. But obviously, because I live in Torbay, I have a particular interest in Torbay. And I'm also chair of the International Agatha Christie Festival, a festival which takes place in Torquay every year around her birthday in September. And one thing the International Agatha Christie Festival is doing at the moment is looking for the next queen of crime among young people in Torbay and across Devon. And we'd love to give a bit of a leg up to someone who finds a passion for writing and try and encourage that. My interest is very much literary, and writers on the Riviera is very much top of mind in my daily occupation.
And I think it's fair to say that Agatha will feature very strongly and prominently in today's
episode.
Sure. Matt, you're next on my list here.
Hi, so my name's Matt Newbury, and I'm one of those rare things. I'm actually kind of a local. So I was born in Plymouth, and I made the big move to Torquay when I was 16. So came up the coast a little bit. So I'm a local person who grew up. I kind of enjoy lots of things. I'm a wild swimmer, so I get out in the sea quite a lot. Love exploring the coastline around here. My day job is work at Torre Abbey Museum, which is an 800-year-old abbey that was later a stately home, and it's now an amazing collection of art. And it's where the Agatha Christie Festival is held every year. It's one of the central locations of that. We've got a potent plants garden in the back of that, which I'll talk about later, all connected to Agatha Christie. And I also write books. I've written a book on Agatha Christie in Devon, and I also write wild swimming books as well. So Wild Swimming Walks was a book that sort of featured lots of walks around Torbay as well. So that's me.
And I love your backdrop there, Goodrington Sands, nice kind of look. Well, we've actually talked about it so many times over it in terms of maybe the geology, but that's a really nice advert that you've got.
So that's my back garden. Well, not quite my back garden. Just down the road is Goodrington Sands. So I should be after this going down there for a little dip and a bit of a barbecue, I think.
Kevin, talk us through your contribution.
Yeah, sure. My name's Kevin Dixon. Let's see, I'm again a local lad. Well, my mum and dad moved here when I was 2, so that's just about enough, isn't it? So we can get away with that
more than me anyway, that's for sure.
Is that all right? Right. Broad Geordie who just lives just down the corridor here. Yeah, let me see. I grew up in Torquay, and when I was at school, it was Agatha Christie country, and it was just known for that. And what I do now is I sort of I'm involved in health and social care because I chair Health Watch, which is there to monitor, and I'm on the Culture Board. I'm really interested in how we use culture and history and the locality to improve, where we are today. So whether that's in health and social care, whether it's looking at, mental distress, about social cohesion, and and I'm really interested in those kind of forgotten and hidden stories. And we see Torquay as I don't know, it was the richest town in England at one time, and it isn't now. So how do you use those stories and bringing out the hidden histories, whether it's, and there's a women's history and there's a LGBT history and all of those kind of sort of cultural histories. And I'm really, and I just really find it exciting to go into a group of, I don't know, 50 or 100 people who don't know what I'm there for, and just keeping them interested in local culture for an hour.
So that's interesting, Kevin. I'd like to pick that up, because we've talked in some of the other episodes about how the physical splendour of the bay, the rocks and the landscape kind of feed this notion that the green gem and the blue gem, the healthiness. But this idea of culture feeding it is equally is important, maybe more so. So one of the things that surprised me, and I think surprised a lot of people come down here, is it looks as beautiful holiday destination and very affluent and all the rest of it, but it's got some of the poorest wards in the country. And I know, talking to some teachers that talk about in Torbay, kids that have never been to the sea, which is absolutely, gravity always just carries you down there. But tell me a little bit more, and we'll kind of expand on it a little bit about the importance then of literature, particularly, but engaging people in that creative side for their well-being. How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean the obvious example on the ground is the thing that Matt and I did about the literature walk, and we came from a slightly different angle. And I quite like using the individual writers and that to explore different themes. I mean, the Oscar Wilde one is obviously LGBT issues and whatever, so it's a way of including people. On a more basic line, we managed to put those little pamphlets out in GP surgeries, so it links into that social prescribing thing. To and what's his name, the Prime Minister's thing about obesity. You go to your GP surgery and the GP says, oh well, here's your tablets, or you really ought to lose some weight, and it's the social prescribing thing as well. You don't need to spend £250,000 on developing exercise equipment like they do in Los Angeles on the beach. You've got Rock Walk, and while you're doing it, so it's getting people exercise and interest and dragging them in on that way. Just by giving them a walk and giving them something interesting to do. So linking, history and literature up with physical exercise and interest. And I've always thought that, as another example, local history is the most sort of democratic of arts or sciences, because anybody can actually get involved in it. If you're vaguely interested in something, you're involved.
And I see Heather nodding vigorously.
Yeah. Well, I think it's well known that reading in particular is very good for your mental health. Yeah. And I am aware that many people go to their GP not so much suffering from physical ailment as depression of various kinds, or worries about life. And to be able to be directed to your local library, Torbay very rich in amazing public libraries, borrow books, be encouraged to read, not only the heritage writers, but contemporary writers, join a book club, go on a walk. All of these things are fantastic for your well-being generally.
I think what's really interesting in Torbay is we've had some really big hitters coming down here in the past who were drawn here and inspired by the coastline and the beautiful beaches and views. And you've got everybody from like Charles Kingsley, Charles Dickens, Rudyard Kipling, Charles Darwin wrote down here. We've already mentioned Oscar Wilde. They all came down here for kind of inspiration to write while they were here. You've also got Agatha Christie, who was born in the resort as well. So you've got some really big names to inspire people, I think. And then, right up to now, we've got people like Leslie Pierce, who's one of the best-selling, I think she's in the top 3 or 4 in the charts at the moment. She lives in Torquay as well. So we've still got writers coming down here being inspired by the area and writing down here. But that's brilliant for kind of engaging people and making them, give them a bit of civic pride and learning a little bit more about the resort they live in.
Yes, I think you're right. If I can jump in here, I mean there isn't anywhere, as far as I know, and I am working across the southwest region. We've got Thomas Hardy in Wessex and Coleridge in Somerset, but there's nowhere like the English Riviera for such a concentration of the icons of English literature, if I can put it that way. And you might say, well, some of these, like Kingsley, Bernard Shaw and others, less well read today, but nonetheless, they've left a kind of mark in the fact they stayed at a particular hotel or they were residing in a particular building that's still there. Agatha Christie's holiday home, of course, in the stewardship of the National Trust. there are many people who still like to make a pilgrimage to those spots. And there are many people who love to write, who are emerging writers, who can be inspired by the places that inspired others. And I think that's why we have such an interest in the writers on the Riviera today. The mapping of the writers of the Riviera was a terrific first step towards really acknowledging the history of Torbay, and indeed linking it to the fantastic geology and forms that the bay offers us.
I think that's something about Agatha Christie as well. She really loved getting out and about around the bay. So, in the Agatha Christie Mile, we go to the place where she learned to swim, which at the time was a segregated bathing area down at Beacon Cove, and she used to swim there. But later on in life, as she had mixed bathing, I think when she was 11, she started going to other places as well. She was a wild swimmer before it was called wild swimming, so she absolutely loved exploring the coast. And even when she moved to Greenway later on in her life, she'd go swimming in the River Dart down there. So I think that's quite fascinating as well.
So you've mentioned Agatha there, and I think we need to, she's the kind of the shining star really in this area. She's by no means the only author, and we'll get back to many others, but let's address it. Who would like to take me into, we've already kind of started into Agatha's early years and things like that, but who wants to pick up the story of Agatha Christie in those early years in this area?
Kevin or Matt is probably best placed.
Oh, no.
In the early years, I'm very keen to talk about what's happening now. But
yeah, we'll get to that.
So
we'll definitely get to that, Heather.
I can have a go. So Agatha Christie was born in Torquay in 1890, and I kind of discovered a lot about her life back in on the 120th anniversary of her birth for the Agatha Christie Festival. We did a thing where we hid 120 red herrings all around Agatha Christie country. So we had cryptic clues, and we hid these herrings all over the place.
Were these real herrings?
Going out and put them, they were cut out herrings, not real.
Right, okay, so I could smell the idea of people not.
No herrings were harmed in the making of it. And we went and hid them everywhere. And the amazing thing was, I thought nobody would find them all, and Agatha Christie fans are so obsessive, they found loads of them. But as I was going around, I realised actually going around and exploring an area through a writer's life is fascinating. And there's so many places, not only when she was growing up, but she used in books around the area as well. So on the Agatha Christie Mile, which you can walk around the middle of Torbay, you start at an Agatha Christie statue. You go to Beacon Cove, which I mentioned earlier, is where she learned to swim. She almost drowned at one point and was a segregated beach. You go to the Imperial Hotel that she featured in 3 of her books. You go past the Pavilion, which is where Archie Christie proposed to her after a Wagner concert. You continue along down the seafront to Princess Pier, which was built in the year she was born, 1890. And she used to go roller skating there as a child. So that was one of the hobbies she had. You carry on walking past Torre Abbey, which she would have gone to social functions at. But then you come to the Grand Hotel, which is where she spent the first night of her honeymoon on Christmas Eve with Archie Christie. So just in Torbay, you can walk along and discover all these amazing places that she swam and stuff. So I think it's a really great way of getting exploring. And you can widen that out further because she obviously bought Greenway House when she came back to the holiday house later on in life. You can go up to Dartmoor, where she wrote her first book. You can go on the Paterson and Dartmouth Steam Railway that she would have taken, but also Poirot would ride on that as well. You go to Burr Island, which is where she set 2 of her books, and then there were none, and An Evil Under the Sun. So it's a great way of getting out and exploring places, and I think she's really a fascinating person to inspire you to do that.
Does anyone else want to pick up some of that in terms of how they see? I'm trying to get as well, and it came through there, that sense of place and how it's fitted into both her life but also her work.
Yes, I mean, one way of sort of bringing that legacy, which is very much a living legacy. I mean, we still watch the movies on television and their new adaptations and so forth, is Literature Works has been placing writers in residence at Greenway House, where you put or you invite a modern writer to spend some time in the house, engaging with members of the public, encouraging them to write. I went along to one of these myself and found myself in Agatha's kitchen, writing, encouraged to write, think back to my childhood, write a poem about my childhood, and the efforts of myself and others who were there, just randomly selected from those who were visiting the house, were subsequently displayed. And there was definitely something to that, to feeling this is where Agatha sat, this is where the room she may have written in, very well known that it can prove extremely inspiring. And the walks that Matt was talking about, I think it's amazing that we have all these sort of stations that she wrote about, because of course she wrote her autobiography, and there've been several biographies since that detailed her life, extraordinary life, because she not only writes about Torbay, but of course she traveled the world.
So to what extent can you take Torbay out of her work? I mean, how much was physically rooted in Torbay, and how much just would have been anywhere she's just kind of populated it, scattered Torbay through? I mean, how fundamental is it, do you think?
I think she included Torbay in several of her books. So the ABC Murders is kind of an obvious one, because it features Princess Gardens with somebody reading a newspaper about the murders in that. There's a murder victim on Elbury Cove. It features the Painted and Dartmouth Stream Railway. So, you know, that's a book that's very much set around Torbay, and it has a lot of things featured in it. Several of her other books feature Torbay, but or Torquay or Torbay, although she might change the name occasionally. It's quite obvious that she's describing the place. But, you know, she also wrote later on in life. She was inspired when she was going out to Alexandria and going on the Orient Express, and, you know, these other books, you know, that you think about with the Nile and all these sort of things that, you know, she talked about other places in the world, but I do think Torbay was a home, and it's a place she always talked about, and she came back to with Greenway, and then set 3 novels in or around Greenway House as well. So that was another big influence as well. So I think, and Dartmoor also featured quite heavily in her books as well. So I think, you know, some of them, because she wrote so many books, obviously lots of them aren't set here. They're set in villages with stately homes and cricket pitches and you know, sinister characters that could be anywhere in the world. But she definitely loved Torbay and put it into things quite often.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. How much is the contemporary draw? I mean, I'm presuming quite a large number of people, when they come down here, know this is Agatha Christie country, and indeed may come because of that. So I just wonder, how much of an important character is she in the tourism, the kind of modern industry?
I think she's very important, remains very important. That's why the festival is called the International Agatha Christie Festival. Yeah. There is very wide following in America and in China. With COVID-19, of course, we've had to mothball this year's festival, but we're looking forward to 2021 and beyond. And we would love to encourage, it's certainly a big part of destination marketing, that tours come here, and they come right across the UK as well as internationally for the festival, and at other times of the year, to experience the place that Agatha Christie loved so much.
So my ignorance here, sorry, I was just going to say, what do you do at the festival? Is it talks, academic talks about Agatha Christie, or is it much more loose and fun?
I hope it is both in many ways. It is a cross art form festival. It has literature at its heart. And there are talks about people who know a lot about Agatha Christie's work and life. And there are lots of other related talks by possibly contemporary crime writers. It's not only a crime writing festival by any means. There's dance in it. There are certainly walks in it, and Matt Newbury plays a part in that, taking people on the guided Christie walks. There are all kinds of performance. We very much welcome a partnership with a number of venues in Torbay, particularly Torre Abbey, which is where the main festival takes place, but also at Palace Theatre Paynton, which was a theatre frequented by Agatha in her day. And there's traditionally a wonderful reading there, usually of a lesser known work, sometimes a first performance of one of the works that's not so well known. Princess Theatre also puts on related plays, as does a little theatre, and we try and develop around the core, which is about a week's worth of activities, a whole fringe of activities, which also includes the hotels, hospitality industry, and as many as we can at the best possible festival. Torquay Museum, I should say, they have a permanent exhibition of some of Agatha Christie's writing and clothes and various artifacts, well worth seeing. So all of these together form the festival.
Sounds like a whole cultural ecosystem. Matt or Kevin, do you want to add anything to it? I mean, how do you talked about the walks, so that sounds like a pretty critical part.
Yeah, no, I'm just to support Evan on that one. I've been to, some of the festival, and it is excellent. That's it's. I think there's a little bit of parallel with with Shakespeare Country and Stratford on Avon and things like that, and the amount of investment. And my earlier point was really just saying the amount of investment in the whole town of Stratford on Avon. You can't even go there without and how we don't. There hasn't been the investment and that's getting a lot better. But I think there's still a huge potential there. I think. And what is it? Agatha's got this. She's second after the Bible or something like that.
Yes, apparently she's still is the best-selling author in spite of the major sellers like J.K. Rowling and Hilary Mantel. She still outsells them and is the best-selling author after the Bible and Shakespeare. Which is amazing, even in 21st century.
And I think as for sort of relevance at the moment, the Kenneth Branagh films, there's another one coming out. So we got the Death on the Nile film coming out. They're absolutely huge. And the TV adaptations every Christmas, there's quite a big TV adaptation. And these things are really, really big productions. BBC are making things that sell all over the world. So, if you go anywhere in the world and mention the name Agatha Christie, I reckon that person would have heard of that person. And there's very few people who can say that. Anywhere. So I think that's amazing.
I think what's really interesting to me is that it's the discussion of Agatha Christie here. He isn't a kind of fossilized, ossified retrospective stuck in the past. It's part of a dynamic that continues and brings in contemporary writers and the kind of the sense of place. And it was alluded to earlier on about that this is still a very active environment for modern writers to be writing about very different issues from Agatha. Does anyone want to talk about that contemporary scene?
Shall I
go for it?
pick up on that one? Yes, there is, of course, at the moment, a very active crime writing scene, Nordic noir and other kinds of new influences coming in there, but also, and this I think is particularly relevant for the Geopark, the interest in nature writing. Writing, to allude to Matt's wild swimming idea, wild writing. There are sort of notable writers that I can quote is the poet Alice Oswald, who has a big following, T.S. Eliot Prize-winning poet, who wrote a book called The Dart, and it's all about the River Dart and its tributaries and what that means. And Cornish-based writer Natasha Carthew, who has been in South Devon undertaking residencies of one kind or another, including working with the National Trust. She advocates what she calls wild writing, which is actually writing outside. So you could imagine, her and a group of emerging writers standing on the Southwest Coast Path or at Hope's Nose or wherever, and actually being inspired by that, by the rocks and the atmosphere around them to produce some great new work. So all of these things are to be encouraged, I think.
Kevin could probably tell us about Torbay's answer to Stephen King as well, I think.
I've got the book.
Yes,
absolutely.
Adam Neville, yes.
Adam Neville. He's
we had Adam on in one of the previous conversations, actually. So to get that. He was chatting the red particularly was something that was coming through. And Adam was mentioning when he was on about the light, the clarity of the water. I mean, there was things around the physical environment that I wouldn't say it directly fed into a particular scene but it kind of fed that kind of creative spirit. I mean, so that I guess must be at the root of many of this.
One of the good things that came out of the pandemic, if there can be such a thing, well, there can be, I think, is after lockdown, so many people got out and started exploring our coast more. And you talk about children not going to the beach and stuff like that. I've never seen so many people walking around coast paths or going to beaches or going swimming or paddleboarding seems to have taken off around here so much. So suddenly I'm seeing so many people. And when you're in a second generation of disconnect from nature, I think it's really important that people are getting out and using this incredible natural geopark and this incredible bay we have around us. And any way of encouraging people to do that. And I think that's a knock-on effect of being stuck in your houses for a few months is getting people out there again. Luckily we've had amazing weather as well. So if we can encourage people through arts and literature as well, good.
That'd be terrific, yeah. And there's something about the counterculture, from the 50s and the beatniks to the hippies and right the way through that those originally those young people that were involved in the poetry and the readings and the Donovan was down here and wrote his Catch the Wind and that. So it's that. But they weren't allowed anywhere around the seafront and all those, the nice pubs, and there's big signs up saying no hippies here. So that kind of counterculture happened 2 or 3 streets back.
So I'm curious about also some of the other writers that have kind of popped in and out of the story of the English Riviera. And I know some of them I know nothing about. I just know that they're kind of there. So maybe you can enlighten me. James Joyce is one. I mean, what's the connection with James Joyce?
Yeah, James Joyce, after he wrote Ulysses, he was invited over and stayed at the Imperial Hotel to write the analysis of Ulysses.
Right.
So there's that link. And I mean, the connection there was just that, everybody else claims for these Bloomsday and festivals have nothing at all to do with James Joyce. We physically had him here. But he didn't do anything. T.S. Eliot, Robert Louis Stevenson was here for a while. Said the weather.
Mary Shelley, something about Mary Shelley. When was she here? And what was?
Yeah, she came here with Percy, and she ended up writing a short story, which was found in it's a lovely story, found in a palazzo about 10 years ago in Italy, and just loosely written children's story. But she was here, so there's that whole link in the very early days with romantic poets, and then it all links up to taking opium and all of that kind of thing, and it's different phases as we actually go through. But because Torquay was the richest, particularly Torquay was the richest town in England, we attracted, as Matt was saying, nearly pretty much anybody that was involved in that. They sort of drifted in, drifted out, did a talk, lived here for a few months, wintered here, wrote a few things, then went off again, including prime ministers and poets, and so it was incredively rich.
I think the Charles Kingsley thing is quite interesting as well. So,
Charles Kingsley.
Yeah, so he was living in a hole up on Dartmoor as the Reverend there, and then his wife sadly had a miscarriage, so they came down to Torquay for her to recuperate, and he started wandering around the seashores around the headlands, and he wrote this book called Glaucus, or The Wonders of the Seashore, that became so popular in Victorian times, it encouraged people to go out and go seaweeding and drawing pictures of this seaweed in their notebooks. And it became a really, really huge draw. So I think that's quite an interesting one. So not that he wasn't inspired to come here; he came here to recuperate, and this amazing thing came out of it.
I think that's it. More modern, Rosamund Pilcher.
Mm-hmm.
A number of her stories were set in Torbay, and I still bump into German coachloads of elderly ladies that have come down to research her, and whenever I do a talk for foreign students, they won't know anybody but Rosamund Pilcher. It's really weird.
So I think her books have been turned into German TV shows.
That's what it was, yeah. Vickridge, who was a contemporary of Agatha Christie, who wrote one of the best First World War poems in Torquay Town Hall. And again, it's, you don't hear that, they knew each other. And that's nearly every First World War poetry book, an anthology, she'll have one or two of her poems in there. I'm just trying to think, Sean O'Casey up in Barbican. So you got that, and all of these writers and poets got their own backstory that links into something else. So Malcolm Lowry drank himself to death at 43 and things like that, and they stayed locally. So,
Kevin, who's the writer that was the worst poet in the world? The Scottish
McGonagall.
Yeah. Oh, McGonagall, of course.
He wrote
an awful poem about Torquay.
They don't have to be good writers, do they?
No.
And I don't know what's good poetry, what's bad poetry, but and Tennyson obviously wrote poems in Torquay, and so
what were Tennyson's?
Audley Park, Audley Court, about
yes, yeah. And he talks about the sea in that poem, the sort of the flatness of the sea, which, as a resident of Torquay, I often look out over the bay and think, it's just so calm, and doesn't always in the winter. It can be quite stormy, but Tennyson refers to the sort of, I think, flat, oily sea.
That's it, yes.
Yeah. Rather a beautiful image.
Oscar Wilde wrote letters that were used in the court case while he was in Torquay.
Yeah.
So love letters to Bosie, I believe. And then you got people like Rudyard Kipling who absolutely hated it here. So he thought that.
Oh, right. No, that's always interesting. The one thing that makes me, we mentioned Darwin earlier on, and we had a big thing. It was Darwin's centenary in Plymouth. Here we're trying to do a big thing, and so I started reading up about Darwin's diaries and how when he couldn't get on the Beagle for various reasons, and he travelled here, he travelled across to Torbay, etc. But there's a lovely line in it because he was so desperate to leave. But I think he tried to leave at Christmas, and the weather was bad, and they get one day of good weather, and it was Christmas Day. Fitzroy said, "We can't leave on Christmas Day. We have to give the." And Darwin was fuming, and he right. Those weeks in Plymouth were the worst of my life.
Yes.
We don't on the branding.
I have to say the Galapagos Islands have got nothing on Torbay. So.
No, that's right. That's right.
Jay.
No, well, it's always nice to know people that came here and didn't like it, but it's certainly in the kind of minority. And you mentioned,
I think he came in here when it was very much a health resort. So you had a lot of people who are very ill going around on respirators and going to these crazy sort of seawater treatment places where they would plunge you into boiling hot water or freezing cold water and wrap you in seaweed and do all sorts of crazy things to you. And that's how Torbay started. It was a health resort before it became a tourism resort. And I think Kipling was here at that point, and he also thought his house was a bit possessed and had a really dark feeling to it as well.
Yeah.
So
He wrote a short story about that, didn't he? So yeah.
this goes through phases of having a certain association, doesn't it? I mean, recently it was the Blue Rins Shearings Coaches Brigades of people who would come down and have Christmas parties in November and then disappear and actually provide very little into the city's economy because it was all kind of housed in certain places. And I think one of the things strikes me that certainly the Geopark's been important for is trying to bring a different type of people into the city, those that are much more curious and want to be adventurous, and whether it's paddleboarding or going up to Dartmoor, etc. And I guess that splays out into the wider creative kind of context.
Absolutely, it brings the money in, and it's what people pay to see and go to. So we've got the new art galleries that are coming up, Artisan. So those folks are putting a lot of time and energy in.
And it's the international. I mean, you mentioned Alice Oswald earlier on with the beautiful story of the dart. And earlier this year, I was in Delhi and at a university there, and I was in someone's, they invited me back and I noticed the book on their bookshelf, and I pointed out, I said, I live very close to it. And they say, that is this completely new way of travel writing that's captured a completely different nuanced way of embedding yourself in it. And they started speaking for about 10 minutes on this book that I just drawn attention to. So the tendrils go out internationally.
Yeah, I think the international aspect of it is fascinating, and we could be doing a lot more with it. I mean, you may know that in October last year, Exeter became a UNESCO City of Literature. The publicity hasn't really evolved yet, but the work is going on behind the scenes, and it became a UNESCO City of Literature. You have to pick a city. Exeter is it for us, but it includes what they call the hinterland of South Devon. Agatha Christie featured very much in the application for that nomination, and the richness of the writers of the Riviera and the UNESCO Geopark connection all contributed to that happening.
I mean, I don't know any part of the country that has such a concentration of specialist natural and cultural heritage sites.
No, I mean, there's a lovely story in a way that sort of links Exeter with Torbay and generally South Devon, and that is, of course, the coming of the railway in the 19th century, and later in the 20th century, the notion that Alan Lane, who started Penguin paperback books, got the idea for a paperback book standing on Exeter St David's Station after he had just visited Agatha Christie in her home in Greenway. So I rather love that, because it suggests that the railways brought people down from London and further north, and people needed to book to read on the train, and along comes the paperback book, easily accessible, cheap, etc. And I like to think it had in no small way a contribution to the flourishing of culture and the interest in reading and writing down here.
And I guess I was interested in how important you thought that UNESCO designation was, but I guess broadening that out a little bit to how important is it, and with that designation, what could we do? So I don't know who would want to pick up on. Heather, do you want to get us started on maybe thinking about?
Yes, well, conservation. That the UNESCO accolade as a geopark, and in connection with the Exeter City of Literature as well. This gives us, this puts us on a global map, more than perhaps in recent decades we felt we were. And it gives us an opportunity to raise concerns, always hard to attract funding, but being mindful of the beauty we have, not to allow further coastal erosion or loss of marine life and the like. I think that is very important. Again, fostering the cultural life that's here. We've all taken a knock through COVID-19, particularly creative practitioners, but coming out of that, recovery of that, in connection with potential, marketing potential we have for the hospitality industry, and when we can, returning to the Bay to enjoy it fully. And I think this conversation has shown how far-ranging and the things that we might be missing, the disconnect that we've got, the poorer members of society who perhaps don't get as much of a look in enjoying the culture that's here as the people who come in, and they come in and go, you know. So yes, I think the UNESCO connections are very important to give us a place in the world and the world's attention on how we're managing our future.
That's right.
Thanks. Matt, what's your thoughts?
For me, the Geopark and UNESCO, everything is about people going out there and enjoying it and using it. And, you know, it really, really scares me to hear these stories that kids might have never been to the beach. Or, you know, when people drive to Dartmoor, most people don't actually walk more than like 100 foot from their car or whatever, you know. And, you know, and really small numbers of people actually going out and using the water in any way, whether it's a boat trip or swimming or whatever. So I just want to see people going out and using nature and respecting it while they're out there. Because that's the other thing. I think it's education about, you know, making sure you take away more than you brought with you, as in rubbish, not fossils. Yeah, just getting people out there and respecting nature and using it properly and enjoying it is the best thing about that. And I think, as Heather said, it's something to frame that within and a different way of thinking about the beauty we have outside our doors.
Fantastic. And last word for you, Kevin.
Yeah, let's see. I sit on the culture board, and as almost like a health and social care rep, but also sort of heritage. There's 850 listed buildings in Torbay, and a lot of those Grade 2 ones are actually in some of the most deprived areas, you know, the bedsit lands and things like that. So it's, I think my interest is in that Torbay is about 20 years ahead of the rest of the country in terms of an ageing population, and I think in terms of social polarisation. So there's some extraordinarily rich people that, you know, got the luxury flats, and then there's some very deprived people, and there's a road, my road here, and it goes along the seafront, and you go just around the corner and you live 8.5 years longer if you live about 10 feet close to the seafront. So there's that real, so I think if we can't sort things out in Torbay, the rest of the country is going to be in trouble in 20 years time. So utilising what we've got, silo breaking in terms of, you know, how do we use arts and culture to make this a better place? How do we use the Geopark, and how do we use everything we've got out there and just make it accessible to people physically? And I think COVID has accelerated things that we've been banging on about for years, whether it's good things, you know, like using digital, or whether it's bad things such as that polarisation and the decline of town centres. And we've got some interesting things about how do we, you know, change our town centres, how do we make them more accessible? What do we do with the most deprived and marginalised folks in our community? But we're ahead of the rest of the country, so let's do it here. And I think we can use Geopark and culture and literature and all of that kind of offer to make things better for everybody. Sorry, it sounds a bit preachy there, but you know.
Yeah.
I hear exactly, and I think that there's a shift in a whole different set of different sectors and all the rest. That realization that it should be about well-being in the whole, and everything that we're doing. In some ways, there might be, of course, some economic return or some kind of return, even in the academic world we're seeing this. But for sure, if you're not delivering sustainable human progress and improved well-being, then what the hell are we doing? And in each way, and we should be doing that. And certainly the UNESCO as a body, that is a massive issue. And so trying to feed that down and root it down through mechanisms like the Geopark seems to me a really positive aspect. Listen, it's been fascinating. Thank you for guiding me through, leading me through by the hand through this. So I thought I knew about Agatha, but I now know a lot more about Agatha. And then the realization there's a whole bunch of really fascinating stories just tucked under the hedgerows is really wonderful. So thank you for sharing this hour with me.
Thanks, Ian. It's been an absolute pleasure.